My name is Yaretzi. I'm 32 years old, and I am a director of risk management for a top-tier insurance firm in Charlotte. My entire career is built on the cold, calculated science of probability. I spend 10 hours a day quantifying chaos, building digital fortresses to protect multi-billion-dollar assets from the what-ifs of the world. I am the woman who sees the storm before the first cloud forms. Yet as I sat on the freezing asphalt of a rain-slicked suburban street, staring into the blinding strobe of police lights, I realized I had committed the ultimate professional sin. I had failed to quantify the most volatile risk in my own life. The people who share my last name. The voice booming through the megaphone didn't sound like a person. It sounded like a machine. "Driver, turn off the engine and drop the keys outside the window. Do it now!" The interior of my sedan was a chaotic kaleidoscope of sapphire and crimson. The lights didn't just flash, they vibrated against my ribcage. I felt a clinical sense of detachment wash over me, the same hyperfocus I use when a client's server goes dark. I rolled down the window. The humidity of a North Carolina Tuesday hit me, thick with the scent of wet pine and hot brakes. I dropped my keys. The metal hit the pavement with a hollow clink that felt like a period at the end of a long, exhausting sentence. "Step out of the vehicle! Hands behind your head! Walk backward toward the sound of my voice." I complied with the frictionless precision of someone who had nothing left to hide. The rain was heavy, the kind of downpour that feels like it's trying to wash the city away. It soaked through my charcoal wool coat, the one I'd bought with my first six-figure bonus, pinning the fabric to my shoulders. My boots crunched on the gravel shoulder. Every step backward was a step away from the life I thought I had built. Suddenly, a pair of hands grabbed my interlaced fingers. The grip was authoritative, rough, and devoid of empathy. I was shoved hard against the trunk of my car. The metal was cold and slick. Then came the sound, the heavy, ratcheting click of Smith & Wesson's steel biting into my wrists. It's a sound you never forget. It's the sound of the state taking ownership of your body. "Yaretzi Thorne," a voice growled in my ear. I recognized the name on the badge as he spun me around. Detective Lennox. He looked tired, his face a map of cynical lines. "You're under arrest for a felony hit-and-run resulting in critical injury. We have your vehicle at the scene, and your ID was found on the floorboard of the driver's side." I didn't scream, I didn't beg. I looked at the rain streaking down his windshield and thought about the events of 3 hours ago. It was 11:15 p.m. I had been at my office downtown, buried in a $50 million bid for a global logistics firm. Then the grid went down. A massive electrical storm had turned the city into a silhouette. My apartment was dark, my office was dark, and my laptop was screaming at 4% battery. This bid was 3 years of my life. It was my ticket to the senior VP suite. I drove to the only place I knew had a backup generator, my mother's estate in Myers Park. I stood on the porch, shivering, the rain a heavy curtain behind me. I knocked. The heavy mahogany door opened just 3 inches, held back by a brass safety chain. My mother, Maris, stood there. She was wearing a silk robe and a white clay facial mask that made her look like a marble statue. She smelled of expensive lavender and the safety of a $2 million home I had helped her keep. "Mom," I said, my voice steady despite the chill. "The power is out across the district. I have 20 minutes to submit the final audit. I just need your Wi-Fi. Just 20 minutes in the foyer." She didn't unlatch the chain. She looked at my soaked clothes with a clinical sort of distaste, as if I were a delivery driver who had brought the wrong order. "Blythe is sleeping, Yaretzi," she whispered. Her voice had that thin, sharp edge she used when she was reminding me of my place. "She has her engagement ceremony tomorrow with the senator's son. She needs absolute quiet to prepare. Her skin is sensitive, and she can't have her rest disturbed by your energy. You're the smart one, dear. You're the director. Go find a 24-hour Starbucks. You always manage." The door clicked shut. The deadbolt engaged with a finality that echoed in my marrow. I stood in the dark, the water pooling in my shoes. I didn't get angry. I moved. I sat in my car in her driveway, rain drumming on the roof like 1,000 tiny hammers. I used my phone to tether a satellite data signal, a service that cost me $150 for an emergency burst. My laptop fan whirred frantically as the battery icon turned red. 11:41 p.m. The upload complete bar hit 100%. I exhaled a cloud of mist in the cold car. At that exact moment, the side garage door of the estate groaned open. I saw our family SUV, the heavy black vehicle I paid the monthly notes on, roar out into the night, splashing my windshield with mud as it sped toward the main road. I thought Blythe was just being reckless again. I thought she was sneaking out to see Harrison. I didn't know she was driving toward a tragedy that would be signed with my name. Now, standing on the highway shoulder in handcuffs, my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. Detective Lennox reached in and pulled it out. He looked at the screen before turning it toward me. It was a text from my mother. Sent 2 minutes ago. I hope you found a place to sit. Don't come back tonight, Yaretzi. You'll only ruin Blythe's morning. The laughter emoji felt like a physical strike. I realized then that the old umbrella my mother had handed me through the crack in the door, the one with the broken rib, was the last thing she would ever give me for free. I had spent my life as the strong one, the one who could handle anything, so they had decided I was the only one who could handle their sins. The victim, I said, my voice low and brittle. Who is it? Lennox didn't answer. He gripped my bicep and marched me toward the cruiser. She's in the ICU. They're not sure she'll make it through the hour. If she does, and if she can talk, we'll see if her story matches your ID. As the door of the police car slammed shut, the world became a vacuum. I looked at my reflection in the wire mesh window. I didn't see a victim. I saw a woman who had spent a decade calculating risk, and I finally understood that the highest risk wasn't the market or the economy. It was the belief that blood makes you a family. The intellectual burden was immense, but as the patrol car rolled away, I felt a strange, chilling clarity. I wasn't just going to the police station. I was going to an audit, and I was going to make sure the Thorne family paid every penny they owed. Let me take you back to the autumn of 2023 in Charlotte, North Carolina. The air was crisp, and the ancient oak trees in Myers Park were turning a deep, expensive shade of copper. I had just been promoted to Director of Risk Management. I remember sitting in my new corner office, looking at the city skyline, and feeling a rare sense of arrival. I thought I was finally standing on my own 2 feet, separate from the gravitational pull of my family's chaos. I didn't realize I was just being moved to a higher shelf in my mother's inventory. You see, the criminal arrests, the handcuffs, and the flashing lights weren't an accident. They were the inevitable result of a system that had been in place since I was a little kid. In the Thorne family, love wasn't something given freely. It was a ranking system. We didn't share affection. We competed for market share. My mother, Maris, valued appearance and social status above all else. To her, people were either assets to be groomed or burdens to be managed. My sister Blythe was the masterpiece. She was radiant, fragile, and perpetually delicate. The kind of person who is described as needing the world to be soft for her. I was the structural support. I was efficient, sturdy, and labeled as unbreakable. It's a dangerous thing to be labeled unbreakable by people who intend to test that theory. Maris had a way of framing our roles that felt like a compliment but functioned like a cage. Blythe was the dream they wanted to have. I was the alarm clock they hated for waking them up to reality. She was celebrated, I was managed. I remember my college graduation. I had completed a double major in finance and data science, graduating at the top of my class. I had secured a high-paying job offer before I even walked across the stage. Maris and Blythe arrived 40 minutes late, whispering loudly as they found their seats. They didn't stay for the keynote speaker. Blythe developed one of her migraines that could only be cured by a trip to the luxury boutiques at South Park Mall. Afterward, as I stood in my gown holding my diploma, Maris didn't ask about my honors or my future. She reached out and brushed a microscopic smudge off my blouse. "You're so capable, Yaretzi," she said, her voice like silk over a blade. "You don't need a grand ceremony to feel important. You already have everything. But Blythe, she's sensitive. She needs these little wins and our full attention just to keep her spirits up. You understand, don't you?" I nodded. I always understood. I swallowed the lump in my throat and convinced myself that being the strong one was a badge of honor. I didn't realize that in my family, strong was just another word for available for harvest. The seeds of the hit and run were planted shortly after that. I was the one who bought the luxury SUV, the very one that would eventually be left in a pool of glass and blood. I didn't buy it for myself. I lived in a walkable part of the city. I bought it as a family vehicle because Blythe's old car was deemed unsafe for the social circles she was entering. I paid the down payment, the insurance, and the monthly notes. I remember the day I brought it to the house. Blythe spent 2 hours taking 17 different photos with the car for her social media. She tagged herself as a self-made queen and talked about manifesting her dreams. Maris stood on the porch, complaining that the charcoal leather interior was a shade too dark for Blythe's aesthetic, never once acknowledging whose bank account had been drained to pay for it. I stood in the driveway, holding the keys I had earned through 80-hour work weeks, while they discussed where they were going to drive it first. I rationalized it all. It makes sense, I'd tell myself during the long nights at the office. Blythe is struggling to find her path. She's marrying into a political family. She needs to look the part. I have the salary, the ironclad credit score, and the 401k. I can handle the burden. I took a quiet, lonely pride in being the one who didn't need a handout. I viewed my family as a low-risk investment, thinking that if I provided enough stability, they would eventually respect the source of it. But trust is a currency that loses its value the more you spend it on the wrong people. Toward the end of 2023, Maris began a strategy of information harvesting. She started asking for my social security number and copies of my ID, claiming she was streamlining our assets for a family trust. She spoke about building a legacy, about making sure we were all protected under one legal umbrella. She was so kind, so attentive during those weeks. She remembered my favorite coffee. She asked about my stress levels, and she listened, truly listened, when I talked. I thought she was finally seeing me. I thought the ice was finally melting. I handed over my documents without a second thought, believing I was helping secure our future. That favoritism is no longer just a matter of sentiment. It's becoming written proof. I thought I was laying the foundation for a legacy, but in reality, I was only providing the ink for them to forge my signature on their own death sentences. I was the only one signing at the bottom of the page, completely unaware that the very people I was trying to save were calculating the price for my destruction. For 3 months leading up to the crash, the Thorne house was strangely quiet. No screaming matches, no pointed criticisms of my wardrobe, no heavy sighs when I mentioned my late nights at the firm. Instead, there was a sudden artificial warmth, a temperature swing that made me drop my guard. My mother, Maris, started sending thinking of you texts at 10 a.m. Blythe invited me to sister dinners at a small, dimly lit bistro in uptown Charlotte where the wine was expensive and the conversation felt, for the first time, like it was about me. I know better now. I look back at those dinners and see them for what they were, a series of strategic audits. But at the time, I was starving. I had spent 32 years being the practical one, the one who was managed rather than celebrated. When Blythe leaned across the table, the scent of expensive jasmine on her scarf drifting toward me, and asked about my security protocols at work, I didn't see a red flag. I saw interest. "You work so hard, Yaretzi," she'd say, her eyes wide and sympathetic. "Is it true you're the only one in that massive building after 11? I worry about you being alone in that parking deck. Which spot do you even use?" I told her everything. My parking spot near the elevator, the habit of keeping a spare ID in my laptop bag, the exact rhythm of my late-night exits. I didn't realize I wasn't connecting. I was providing a blueprint. I was handing over the coordinates for my own destruction, and I did it with a smile because it felt like connection. I didn't realize I was feeding her ammunition until the gun was already pressed to my head. The first real ask came a month later. It was packaged in a just this once wrapper. Maris called me into the library, her voice a hushed conspiratorial whisper. Harrison, Blythe's fiancé, was facing a temporary liquidity issue with a real estate investment. It would look bad for the senator's family if a Thorne check bounced. "Just this once, Yaretzi," she said, her hand resting on mine. I realize now that touch was a measurement of my resolve. $4,200. It's for the family's reputation. Just for a month until his escrow clears. I remember the feeling in my chest, a mix of pride and fear. I opened my banking app, my fingers steady but my heart racing. I watched the numbers leave my account. I told myself I was protecting the legacy. I told myself this was what family did. But just this once is the gateway drug of exploitation. Within weeks, the requests became an escalation ladder. First, it was a $1,500 monthly maintenance fee for the Myers Park estate, a house I didn't even live in. Then an emergency roof repair that cost me $8,000. Finally, the $12,000 deposit for Blythe's custom bridal gown because her credit was tied up in the wedding planning. I stopped being a daughter and became a line item. I was a recurring payment they didn't have to earn. Whenever I felt the weight of it, whenever I hesitated, Maris would deploy the compliment with poison. "You're so successful, Yaretzi," she'd say, her voice dripping with artificial pride. "You have so much, while Blythe is just starting her life. It must be nice to be the one who never struggles." It's a gift, really, being as unbreakable as you are. It's a specific kind of pain to be praised for the very thing that is killing you. By the 18-month mark, I had started keeping a secret of my own. As a director of risk, I couldn't help it. I needed to see the data. I created a hidden spreadsheet on my private drive. I tracked every loan, every emergency, every just this once. Date, amount, recipient, reason. The shock total was $86,400. Not a single cent had been repaid. I looked at that number and felt a cold chill, but I tucked it away. I told myself that once Blythe was married, the investments would end. I was wrong. The family wasn't just taking my money, they were taking out insurance on my downfall. One evening, while looking for a stamp in Maris's desk, I found a letter from a high-risk insurance carrier. It was a confirmation for a commercial umbrella policy in my name, specifically covering the luxury SUV. The premium had been paid from a joint account Maris had strongly suggested I keep for family expenses. I scanned the document, my eyes stopping at a forged signature that looked more like mine than my own. The policy payout for a catastrophic, unavoidable accident was $500,000. I felt a flicker of genuine doubt then. My skin went cold, but just as I was about to process it, Blythe walked into the room, radiant and smiling, asking for my opinion on flower arrangements. I tucked the paper back into the drawer. I rationalized it. I told myself Maris was just being proactive about my assets. I was so busy managing the world's risks that I didn't see the one sitting across the dinner table from me. I handed them the ammunition. I handed them the weapon. I handed them the map. I didn't know it then, but that forged signature was the exact moment I ceased to be their daughter and became a $500,000 insurance claim. A week later, the storm hit Charlotte. The power went out in Myers Park. The deadline for my $50 million bid was looming. My laptop was dying, and the SUV was idling in the driveway, its engine a low, predatory hum in the rain. I walked out of that house with a broken umbrella, never realizing that the people inside had already decided I was the only thing standing between them and a payout. Tuesday, 11:20 p.m., Myers Park, Charlotte. That was the exact moment the architecture of my life finally cracked open. The storm had turned the city into a graveyard of shadows. I stood on my mother's porch, the charcoal wool of my coat growing heavy with the deluge. The rain didn't just fall. It pounded, smelling of wet asphalt and the sharp metallic tang of ozone. In my hand, my laptop was a useless brick. 4% battery. I had exactly 40 minutes to submit a $50 million bid that represented 3 years of 80-hour weeks and missed holidays. It was more than a contract. It was my exit strategy from the Thorne family's expectations. I knocked again. The heavy mahogany door groaned as it moved just 3 inches. The brass safety chain slid into its lock with a metallic screech that felt like a final verdict. Through the gap, I saw my mother, Maris. Her face was a flat, white mask of clay. Her eyes narrowed with the cold irritation of someone interrupted during a sacred ritual. "I told you, Yaretzi," she whispered. The lavender scent from her robe drifted out, clashing with the raw smell of the storm. Blythe needs her rest. Her engagement is tomorrow. I won't have you waking her up with your panic. You're the one who chose a high-stress career. Deal with it. The door clicked shut. The deadbolt engaged. I sat back in my car, the interior windows fogging rapidly. The rhythmic clicking of my hazard lights was the only heartbeat in the dark. I wasn't crying, I was calculating. I pulled out my phone and sent a message to the family group chat, the one where I usually just posted congratulations on Blythe's latest social media milestones. Mom, I'm in the driveway. My apartment is dark. I have 25 minutes to upload the bid. Please, just let me sit in the foyer for 15 minutes. My laptop is dying. I watched the screen. 11:35 p.m., 11:36 p.m. The scene status appeared. A minute later, a notification banner popped up. It was from Maris. Blythe needs her beauty rest for the ceremony. Don't be dramatic, Yaretzi. There's a Starbucks downtown. My assistant, Ren, was already on a frantic call through my car's Bluetooth. She heard the rain hitting the roof like gravel. She heard my breathing, which had slowed into the clinical pace I used during a market crash. I see the message on the shared thread, Yaretzi, Ren said, her voice trembling with a fury I wasn't allowed to feel. I'm screenshotting it, all of it. The timestamp, the emoji, the scene receipt. Don't worry about the office. I've just authorized a $150 emergency satellite data tether on the company card. Look for the Thorne Risk Secure signal. Just get that file up. I didn't beg a second time. I connected to the satellite signal. My laptop fan whirred like a jet engine, fighting to stay alive. 11:41 p.m. The upload complete bar hit 100%. At that precise second, the side garage door of the estate roared open. I watched my own black SUV, the one I paid for, lunge out into the rain, splashing mud across my car's hood as it sped toward the main road. I thought it was just Blythe being Blythe. I didn't realize it was the delivery of a payload. Fast forward 3 hours. 2:15 a.m., the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Precinct. The room smelled of stale coffee, industrial floor wax, and the damp wool of my coat. I sat in a bolted-down chair, staring at case file #CLT 2026-0914. Detective Lennox sat opposite me, his blue ink pen hovering over intake form 42B. He didn't look like a man interested in family dynamics. He looked like a man interested in a closed case. You want to hear the call? Lennox asked. He pressed play on a digital recorder. I heard my mother's voice. It was perfect. She sounded like a concerned citizen, a pillar of the community doing her civic duty. Yes, dispatch. I'm calling to report a woman driving erratically near the intersection of 4th and Elm. She just hit a pedestrian. She didn't even stop. I recognized the car. It's a black SUV, license plate ending in 880. There was a pause on the tape. Then the dispatcher asked for a description. She's wearing a charcoal gray wool coat, Maris said, her voice clear and helpful. Hair pulled back in a tight bun. She looked erratic, very stressed, like she was having some kind of breakdown. The recording ended. The silence in the interrogation room was absolute, punctuated only by the angry hum of the fluorescent lights. A profound, icy clarity washed over me. My mother hadn't described a driver she saw at a hit-and-run scene in the middle of a rainstorm. She had described me. She had described exactly what she saw through that 3-inch crack in the door 10 minutes before the accident occurred. She hadn't seen a crime. She had used my misery as a physical template to frame me for one. I looked at the Starbucks text on my phone, then at the police report on the table. The strong daughter was no longer an asset. I was a liability they had decided to liquidate to protect Blythe's big day. Strangers in uniforms showed up with handcuffs to protect the law. I said softly to the empty air. My family showed up with a script to protect a wedding. I realized then that I hadn't been forgotten. I had been erased. But Maris had made a fatal error in her risk assessment. She forgot that I'm the one who writes the code. She forgot that a woman who has nothing left to lose is the only one who can truly afford to tell the truth. I signed the intake form with a steady hand. My family had closed the door on me, but in doing so, they had locked themselves inside a house I was about to dismantle, brick by brick. I am sitting in interrogation room B of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg precinct. It is a windowless concrete box that smells of industrial floor bleach and the stale, cold residue of other people's desperation. The fluorescent light above hums at a frequency that usually triggers a migraine, but tonight it feels like a signal. I touch the bruising on my right wrist, a deep purple souvenir from the steel ratchets. Every time the pulse thumps against the damaged skin, it reminds me of the exact moment I stopped being a daughter and became a target. Detective Lennox walks in and drops a clear plastic evidence bag on the steel table. Inside is my driver's license, the edges stained with something dark and dry. Responding officers found it tucked into the sun visor of the black SUV, he says, his eyes searching mine for a flinch. Along with a half-empty bottle of vodka under the driver's seat. You want to explain how your ID ended up in the one place every driver looks when they're pulled over? I don't look away. I don't keep my ID in the sun visor. I keep it in my RFID-shielded laptop bag, tucked into a secondary zip pocket that I check every night before I leave the office. Seeing it there, planted, deliberate, staged for a quick discovery, is the final line of code in a corrupt file. I look at the license and then back at Lennox. In my world, there is a fundamental choice when a system fails. You either collapse with the structure, or you analyze the wreckage to build something impenetrable. Break or build. Keep paying the debt or stop the bleeding. I choose to build. The heavy iron door groans open again. It isn't a lawyer who walks in. It's Blythe. She is still wearing her custom silk wedding gown, the white train dragging across the dirty linoleum floor like a wounded bird. She looks absurd, a $20,000 masterpiece in a concrete cage. She smells of expensive champagne and sharp, metallic panic. She leans over the table, her eyes wide and wet with the theatrical tears she's been perfecting for 35 years. "Yaretzi, thank God," she whispers, her voice trembling. "Mom told me everything. You have to understand. If I take a felony DUI now, the senator's family will cancel the wedding by sunrise. Everything we've worked for, the Thorne name, our entire future, it's all gone. But you're the strong one. You have a clean record. You're the director. People respect you. If you just tell them you were confused, if you just take this for me, Mom and I will make sure you're taken care of. We'll hire the best lawyers. Please, Yaretzi, don't ruin this for me." I look at her. I don't see my sister. I see a high-risk liability that has finally exceeded its credit limit. I don't cry. I don't even get angry. I simply turn to Detective Lennox. "I'd like my one phone call now," I say. My voice is level, stripped of the warmth I used to offer her as a sacrifice. Lennox hands me my personal device, which had been confiscated during processing. I don't call a criminal defense attorney. Not yet. Instead, I open my enterprise management portal. I log into the master administrative dashboard for the Thorne family's logistics. I work through the checklist with the clinical precision of a system reboot. Recurring payment for Myers Park Estate Utilities canceled. Authorized user Blythe Thorne. Platinum credit card terminated. Automatic escrow transfer for the property mortgage disabled. Insurance policy hash 8812 for the luxury SUV deactivated. Two-factor authentication on all joint accounts enabled to my private device only. Each tap on the screen feels like a thread snapping. I am not just cutting off money, I am withdrawing my consent to be used. I am reclaiming the energy I've spent as the family's silent investor. "What are you doing?" Blythe asks, her voice rising in a pitch of frantic entitlement. I set the phone down. "I'm auditing the risk, Blythe, and I've decided the Thorne family is no longer a viable investment." There were no dramatic monologues, no loud arguments. Just a deep, quiet relief that enveloped me as I shed the burden I had carried for 12 years. Since leaving home for college, I felt a sense of relief. The silence in the room wasn't an empty space. It was a safe haven. A few minutes later, the observation glass at the back of the room darkens, and Wren, my assistant, appears at the door. She isn't looking at me with pity. She carries a manila folder and a paper cup of black coffee. Hot, bitter, and exactly how I like it. She gives me a mission-ready nod. "Director," she says, her voice steady. "The server logs from the office are confirmed. We have the timestamp of your bid submission at 11:41 p.m., along with the GPS ping from your car's satellite tether. You were statically located in the driveway for 22 minutes while the SUV was moving at 60 miles per hour toward 4th and Elm." I take a sip of the coffee and hand the folder to Detective Lennox. Detective, you've been looking for a driver, I say, leaning back in the bolted-down chair. But I think you'd be much more interested in a conspiracy to commit insurance fraud and felony obstruction. My mother and sister forgot one thing. They think physical evidence is the truth. I know that in the modern world, physical evidence is just a shadow cast by digital architecture. And I'm the architect. I knew the fallout was coming. I knew that within the hour my mother would realize the cards were declined and the lights at the estate were going dark. I wanted them to feel the cold before I even left the building. But I didn't expect what happened next. Lennox's desk phone rang, a sharp, jarring sound in the quiet room. He picked it up, listened for 10 seconds, and his face went completely still. He looked at me, then at Blythe, who was still clutching her silk skirts. "That was the ICU," Lennox said. "The victim just regained consciousness. She's asking for the owner of the vehicle. Specifically, she's asking for Yaretzi Thorne. The holding area of the precinct at 5 a.m. is a vacuum of gray light and low-frequency humming." I sat on the metal bench, watching dust motes drift through a stray beam of morning sun. My mind felt like a hard drive that had just been formatted. The recurring debts were deleted, the family threads were muted, and the weight I had carried for 12 years was gone. There is a terrifying sort of stability in having nothing left to lose, but beneath that calm, the ache remained. A specific, high-pitched ringing in my ears that sounded exactly like my mother's voice on that 911 recording. I could still smell the expensive jasmine on Blythe's scarf and feel the cold brass of the safety chain Maris had refused to unlatch. In my world of risk management, we call this residual impact. You can patch the system, but the structural stress remains. My name is Yaretzi Thorne, and I was learning that while you can't choose your blood, you can absolutely choose your silence. The silence was shattered at 6:04 a.m. Detective Lennox's radio crackled with a burst of static that made me flinch. The dispatcher's voice was mechanical, stripped of emotion. "Lennox, we have a status change on the 4th and Elm MVC. Victim in ICU room 402 is conscious. Stable vitals. She's requesting the registered owner of the vehicle for a field identification. Right now." Lennox didn't look at me. He didn't ask if I was ready. He stood up, the legs of his chair shrieking against the linoleum. "We're moving," he said. It wasn't a walk. It was a march. 4 minutes to sign the transport authorization. 9 minutes of silent sirens as the cruiser cut through the morning fog of Charlotte. ETA to the trauma ward. 3 minutes. The kinetic energy of the drive felt like a countdown. I watched the blurred neon signs of diners and gas stations streak across the window. I thought about a quote I once read, that the truth is like the sun. You can shut it out for a time, but it ain't going away. I wasn't going to the hospital to defend myself. I was going to let the truth do its job. The ER entrance of Charlotte Memorial smelled of hot breaks and industrial sanitizer. As we stepped into the lobby, the atmosphere shifted. A local news crew was stationed near the vending machines. And there, in the center of the hallway, was Maris. She was still wearing her silk robe, now covered by a cashmere coat, and she was clutching Blythe, who was huddled in a blanket. Maris was speaking to a reporter, her face a perfect portrait of maternal tragedy. When she saw me walking in with Lennox, my hands still bound by the heavy steel cuffs, she let out a theatrical sob that echoed off the sterile walls. "Yaretzi!" she cried, reaching out. "Oh, my poor, troubled girl. We're here. We're going to get you the help you need." I didn't stop. I didn't look at her. I walked past my mother as if she were a stranger standing at a bus stop. I saw the flash of the camera and the way Blythe's hand went to her throat, her engagement ring catching the harsh fluorescent light. They were still following the script. They didn't realize the theater was about to close. Lennox led me into ICU room 402. The air inside was heavy with the rhythmic beep hiss of a ventilator and the scent of antiseptic. Astria Vance lay in the bed. Her head was bandaged, and her face was a map of blunt force trauma. But her eyes were open. They weren't the eyes of a victim. They were the eyes of a federal prosecutor who had spent 20 years dissecting lies in courtrooms. Lennox stepped to the bedside. "Ms. Vance, this is Yaretzi Thorne, the registered owner of the SUV." Astria didn't look at my face immediately. Her hand, bruised and tethered to an IV line, reached out and tapped the digital tablet Lennox was holding. She pointed to the file I had submitted, the $50 million bid. I know her! Astria rasped, her voice like dry leaves. Not from the road, from the data. She turned her gaze to me, and for a second, the room felt like it had lost all oxygen. I was in my home office, 11:41 p.m. sharp. I saw your submission hit the server, Yaretzi. I approved the bid. I remember thinking, finally someone who understands the risk. I hit send, and then I walked to my car to grab my bag. She looked at Lennox, her eyes narrowing with a terrifying clarity. I saw the SUV blow through the light. I saw the driver through the windshield for 3 seconds before the impact. It wasn't this woman. It was a woman with blonde hair screaming into a cell phone. The silence that followed was measured in heartbeats. Total, absolute silence. I looked through the glass partition of the room. Maris had stopped crying. She was standing frozen in the hallway, her face pale beneath her makeup. Blythe's mouth had gone slack. The identity collision was complete. The victim hadn't just recognized me. She had verified my alibi with a federal timestamp. Astria sank back into the pillows, her eyes never leaving mine. As Lennox began to unlock my handcuffs, Astria leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a whisper that only I could hear. They think they buried the evidence, Yaretzi, but they don't know about the black box. Check the vanity in the master suite. The key is behind the mirror. The office at 2 a.m. had a specific, sterile atmosphere. It was the scent of hot toner and the rhythmic, industrial hum of the high-capacity printer. In my world, a crisis is solved by organizing the variables until the solution becomes the only logical outcome. I wasn't crying, and I wasn't pacing. I was building. I watched the printer print out the log-dual GPS location data showing my personal cell phone connected to a fixed base station in Myers Park, while the SUV's integrated navigation system tracked a chaotic, high-speed route toward the 4th and Elm intersection. Next came the report weight sensor data from the driver's seat. It was a single line of raw code, highlighted in yellow. Occupant weight, 115 pounds. I weigh 140 pounds. Blythe weighs exactly 115. A number doesn't have an agenda. A number doesn't try to protect a wedding. Wren, my assistant, stood beside the laminating machine, her face pale under the office lights. She flipped through the last section of the file, related to the fraudulent insurance policy. $360,000, Yaretzi, she whispered, her voice cracking. They didn't just frame you for an accident. They've been treating your life like a hedge fund they could short. They were counting on your conviction to trigger a payout that would clear Harrison's debts. How can you be this calm? I reached for a pack of red tab dividers. I carefully labeled the first one. Direct evidence of perjury. Anger is a luxury I can't afford right now, Wren, I said, my voice as steady as a metronome. If I scream, I'm the erratic daughter they want everyone to see. If I provide a binder, I'm a director. Let the paper do the talking. Facts don't have feelings. As I snapped the rings of the black binder shut, my phone pinged on the mahogany desk. It was a text from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in 3 years. Yaretzi, stay away from the gala tonight. Maris is telling everyone you've had a catastrophic mental breakdown due to work stress. She's saying the arrest was a cry for help, and that the family is heartbroken. Everyone is looking at Blythe like she's a saint for still wanting you there. They've already won the room. I stared at the screen. They were performing a brain surgery on social media, stripping me of my reputation before I could defend it. I didn't react. I just felt the weight of the tiny camera pinned to the underside of my lapel. It had begun live streaming to a secure cloud server. The Thorne estate in Myers Park was a fortress of old money elegance. The driveway was a half-mile of flickering lanterns, and the air smelled of expensive lilies and the salt of a string quartet's melody. It felt like a courtroom draped in silk. I walked through the front doors, my charcoal coat discarded to reveal a sharp, midnight blue suit. I held the black binder under my arm like a shield. The room went quiet in stages. It started at the foyer and rippled toward the champagne tower. People I had known since childhood turned their heads, their expressions a curdled mixture of pity and suspicion. Maris approached me immediately. Her smile was as fixed as her Botox, but her eyes were cold, calculating windows. She reached out to touch my arm, a gesture meant to look maternal for the benefit of the surrounding guests. "Yaretzi, darling," she cooed, her voice loud enough to carry. "You look tired. Are you sure you should be out of the facility so soon? We told everyone you were recovering. We just want what's best for you." I stepped back, breaking the contact. I looked her directly in the eye, stripping every ounce of daughter from my posture. "Good evening, Mrs. Thorne," I said. The use of her title instead of mom caused a visible flinch in her jaw. "I'm not here for the hospitality. I'm here because an audit is long overdue." "She's confused," Blythe whispered to a group of socialites nearby, her hand going to her throat. She looked radiant in her silk gown, the perfect golden child. The stress of the investigation, it's just too much for her. I ignored the whispers. I scanned the room and found Judge Miller standing near the fireplace. He had been a mentor to Astria Vance, and his reputation for integrity was the only thing in this room that wasn't for sale. He saw the binder. He saw my eyes. He didn't say a word, but he gave me a slight, grave nod and placed his hand on the back of an empty chair, clearing a path toward the center of the room. It was a silent signal. The arena is ready. The host clinked a crystal glass, signaling the start of the engagement toasts. Blythe stepped toward the podium, her fiancé, Harrison, beaming beside her. But before the judge could offer his congratulations, my mother stepped forward and intercepted the microphone. She turned to face the crowd, her face a mask of predatory gleam disguised as grief. "Before we celebrate Blythe's beautiful future," Maris announced, her voice echoing through the ballroom, "the Thorne family needs to address the unfortunate rumors regarding my youngest daughter, Yaretzi. We have a formal statement to make about her condition and her involvement in the recent tragedy. We believe in total transparency." She looked at me, a smirk ghosting behind her lips. She thought she was going to bury me publicly before I could even open the binder. She thought she had the last word. She didn't realize that I had spent the last 48 hours rewriting the ending of her story. I adjusted my grip on the folder and waited for her to start the lie. The Thorne estate was glowing. From the outside, the Myers Park mansion looked like a lighthouse of old-world stability, its tall windows casting long amber bars of light across the manicured lawn. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of $500 an hour floral arrangements and the sharp, bubbly effervescence of vintage champagne. A string quartet played something light and airy in the corner, a melodic veil intended to hide the rot behind the smiles. I stood near a marble pillar toward the back of the ballroom, holding a glass of mineral water. I wasn't the center of attention, and that was by design. I watched the room with the clinical eye of a strategist. I noticed the way the light caught Blythe's engagement ring, a 3-carat diamond that I knew, with mathematical certainty, had been partially funded by the emergency roof repair money I had wired to my mother 6 months ago. Maris stood at the center of the room, holding a wireless microphone. She looked every bit the matriarch, her posture regal, her face a perfect portrait of maternal grief, carefully maintained for the benefit of Charlotte's elite. "Thank you all for being here," Maris began, her voice steady and laden with practiced emotion. "We've had a difficult week. As many of you know, my youngest, Yaretzi, she's always been the fragile one. The stress of her corporate position, it finally broke her. The unfortunate accident on Tuesday night wasn't an act of malice. It was a cry for help. We are doing everything in our power to ensure she gets the psychological care she needs." The room erupted into a ripple of sympathetic murmurs. Guests shook their heads, looking over their shoulders at me with curdled pity. I didn't interrupt. I didn't shout liar or perjurer. I simply stood there, absorbing the weight of her words. Silence is a specific kind of pressure. When you don't fight a lie immediately, you force the liar to expand it until the structure becomes top-heavy. I watched Blythe nodding beside Harrison, a single perfect tear hitting her silk bodice. They were hanging themselves with their own narrative, and I was just the witness. The power shift happened when Judge Miller set his crystal glass down on a mahogany side table. The sharp clack of glass on wood rang through the ballroom like a gavel. "Maris," the judge said, his voice a low, legal rumble that commanded immediate silence. "I think we've heard enough about conditions. I've spent the morning at the hospital with Astria Vance. I've seen the server logs Yaretzi provided to the district attorney. I think it's time we heard the actual audit." The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. The false warmth evaporated, replaced by a chilling, atmospheric stillness. I stepped forward. I didn't go to the podium. I didn't need the height. I opened the black manila binder and began to read from the summary page, my voice as level as a horizon line. August 2023. $12,000 for a custom gown deposit. November 2023. $45,000 for an unsecured loan to Harrison's investment firm. Tuesday night, 11:41 p.m. A 911 call placed from this address describing a driver in a charcoal coat, while my personal GPS pings were statically located in the driveway 10 miles from the impact site. I looked directly at my mother. The color drained from her face, not gradually, but all at once, leaving her looking like a discarded statue. "As of 11 p.m. tonight," I continued, "I have ceased to be the guarantor for this estate. The escrow payments have been canceled. The SUV sitting in the garage has been remotely immobilized via the corporate fleet portal. The supplementary credit cards in your purses, Maris. Blythe. They are now nothing more than plastic scrap." The silence was no longer heavy. It was suffocating. Then came the final fracture. Harrison, the senator's son, turned so pale I couldn't believe human skin could be that colorless. He looked at the document I'd placed on the table, the insurance fraud report. He realized that the Thorne name was no longer a political asset. It had become dangerous. "I'm not going down for your fraud, Blythe," Harrison whispered, though in the quiet room it sounded like a shout. He pulled out his phone and tapped the AirPlay icon for the house's integrated media system. A video flared to life on the large screen above the fireplace. It was the interior dashcam footage from the SUV. It showed Blythe, her face frantic, her hair disheveled, sobbing into her phone as she pulled into the garage on Tuesday night. "Mom, I hit someone," Blythe's voice echoed through the ballroom. "What do I do?" There was blood. Then came my mother's voice, crisp and cold. "Give me Yaretzi's spare ID from the laptop bag. We'll say she was driving. She's strong, Blythe. She'll take the hit. She always does." The crowd didn't gasp. They moved. It was a physical reaction, a collective step backward. Guests began to migrate away from Maris and Blythe, creating a literal void of empty floor around them. They were being socially quarantined in real time. I closed the binder. I looked at my mother, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see a giant. I saw a woman who had simply run out of other people's lives to spend. "I didn't come here to shame you," I said. These were the only words I would speak to the room. "I came here to stop being the ghost in your machine. You owe me 12 years of my life, 12 years of silence, and a debt of truth that you can never repay. Tonight, I'm collecting what's mine. You said I was the unstable one, Mom. But I'm the only person in this house who owns the ground they're standing on. That is the boundary. Do not cross it again." I didn't wait for an apology. I didn't wait for Blythe to stop screaming at Harrison. I set my glass on the ledger, turned my back on the masterpiece, and walked toward the exit. Judge Miller was waiting by the front door. He didn't say a word. He just handed me his card with a grave, respectful nod. As I walked out into the Charlotte night, the lights of the Thorne estate flickered, a symbolic glitch in the paid-for reality they had built on my back. The air was cold, but for the first time in 32 years, it didn't feel heavy. I had finally performed the only risk assessment that mattered. I had removed the liability, and I was finally structurally sound. The gala didn't end with a thunderous applause or a dramatic cinematic sweep. It ended with a slow, chilling evaporation. As Blythe was led out by Detective Lennox, the silk train of her wedding gown catching briefly on the mahogany doorframe, no one rushed to her side. The socialites I had spent a decade trying to impress simply drifted away. I watched them in the mirror of the foyer, their heels clicking rhythmically on the hardwood as they sought the exit in a hushed, collective retreat. I turned back to the ballroom. Maris was standing in the center of the floor, the wireless microphone still clutched in her hand. The lights were still on, the chandeliers throwing brilliant, mocking rainbows across the room, but the power had completely shifted. I saw Judge Miller offer me a silent, grave nod of respect before he walked past my mother as if she were a piece of discarded furniture. No one argued. No one defended the narrative. For the first time in my life, the air in that house was breathable because the lies had finally run out of oxygen. I didn't look back at her. I didn't need a confession or a tearful apology to know I was whole. I just walked out into the night, feeling the weight of 32 years finally lift from my shoulders. 3 months later, the world sounds different. I am sitting on the porch of a small cedar cottage on the Outer Banks. There is no Myers Park prestige here, no senator's circles, just the relentless, honest rhythm of the Atlantic. My sleep is finally deep, undisturbed by the emergency pings of family crises. The legal proceedings against Blythe and the insurance fraud investigation are moving through the system with the slow, grinding certainty of a machine I no longer have to fuel. My phone vibrated on the wooden table. It was an unrecognized number, a burner phone. I answered, and for 10 seconds there was only the sound of shaky breathing. "Yaretzi," my mother's voice came through, thin and stripped of its boardroom authority. "The bank. They took the SUV. The estate is dark, Yaretzi. They cut the power this morning. How could you do this to your own mother? We just need 1 more month. Just a bridge loan to get through the hearing. Please." I didn't get angry. I didn't remind her of the forged signature or the 911 call where she described her own daughter as a monster to save a silk dress. I didn't offer her a single word of spite. Instead, I stood up and walked to the edge of the balcony. I held the phone out toward the horizon, letting her hear the waves crash against the shore for exactly 10 seconds. It was the sound of a world that didn't owe her anything. Without saying a word, I brought the phone back to my ear and tapped the master administrative portal on my tablet. I executed the hard wipe command I had prepared weeks ago. Every contact, every shared cloud photo, and every digital tether to my life vanished from her device in a silent burst of code. I blacklisted the IMEI number from every cellular network I managed. The line went dead. I sat back in my chair, watching the gray sea meet the gray sky. I realized then that I didn't need my family to see me to know I existed. I had spent my entire life being a support beam for a house that was built on sand, thinking that if I was strong enough, the structure wouldn't fall. But a house held together by debt and deception isn't a home, it's a prison. I walked inside and picked up the black binder from the gala. I didn't shred the documents, I didn't burn them, I simply placed the folder on the bottom shelf of my new office, next to the tax returns and the property deeds. It was no longer a weapon. It was just a closed file in a well-managed life. My world didn't collapse when I stopped carrying them. It just became quiet, precise, and finally, mine. I've learned that the greatest risk in life isn't losing the people you love. It's losing yourself trying to save people who only see you as a contingency plan. If you're currently carrying a weight that isn't yours, if you're waiting for a thank you that will never come, I promise you, the world won't end when you set it down. It will only just begin. I'm Yaretzi Thorne, and this was the last time I ever played the part of the Golden Child's ghost.